visiting. I was actually visiting, I think, a couple of years ago in 2019, and I did a few sessions. At the time, I was on the ramp up to finish off my PhD. So it's quite it feels like a lifetime ago, although it's only a few years. So yeah, what I'm going to do today, as Isabel kindly anticipated, is sharing some of my research with you and insights. So I'm both a lecturer and a researcher between London, so the London College of Fashion, and here at USC Marshall School of Business. So my research interests are between technology, innovation, and AI technologies in fashion and the creative industries. So hopefully these insights will be helpful for you, for like your practitioner side, but also for the instructor side. So we can, as we go along, comment on how to integrate this into your teaching practice. And absolutely feel free to raise your hands, and so that it's not just me talking for 1 hour. I'm Italian, so I could go on forever, I promise, but it would be kind of not as engaging for you, I guess. Okay, so what we're looking at today, and you've seen the title already, is technological disruption in design and the fashion industries. So we're starting with an overview, examples, and success factors that you can bring to class. And I'm also really keen on having these two-way conversations so that I can see what you think about these issues from you, since it's something I've been investigating for the past few years. And so my background is, I come from the industry myself. I worked in China for a while. Let me see if this can progress. I worked in China for a while for a Chinese luxury brand, and I went back to Europe. I worked for an Italian menswear brand, and I was based in their Luxembourg office dealing with business development, PR events, and so on. And then I decided to go to academia, and I did my PhD with the School of Engineering in Manchester, UK, looking at technology innovation within established fashion organizations. So all the supply chain and consumer-facing part of the technology. And the project that I'm doing here with Professor Tellis, and this leads to this wonderful slide, is looking at technological innovation in fashion and apparel across different markets. So we're really comparing the US, Europe, in particular the UK, because that's where I'm based, and then Asia. So it's like a lifetime project. I think it will take up my career, my life. And I'm really excited about it. So I came to visit here at USC at the beginning of January, and I started to speak with a lot of designers, taking a lot of surveys, speaking with tech providers. So trying to really understand how this technology disruption happens in fashion and what's different between the US and the UK. So I have kind of like my insights that I want to share with you. But of course, since you are the experts for the US market mainly, it would be great to start off and have a bit of an overview and see what you think as the experts from your point of view. So let me share the motivations, and then I have some areas for brainstorming that we can share and hopefully have a good exchange and conversation with before I share some more findings. So here's an overview of the industry and what we're doing. Why are we doing this study? So, of course, technological innovation is the new normal. It's what is needed for growth, for success in any contemporary markets. But especially in fashion, we see, and what I see working in the fashion industry in Europe, a lot of established organizations like incumbents are constantly failing to innovate, and we see new brands coming in and actually being really successful in the way they innovate, they respond to market trends, new consumer behaviors, and so on. So we see that this pattern of incumbents coming into or being into a market and being disrupted by entrant brands is very common in tech products like automotive industries, high tech, even FMCG. But we wonder what happens in the fashion industry. So I convinced USC to engage in this project because, of course, the fashion industry is massive, right? So It has a very big portfolio in terms of brands, constantly emerging designer brands, and so on. So we say this is a great context to do this research because, of course, there are a lot of strong brand names, reputation, not just in luxury, also in fast fashion, high street, so the Zara, the Nike, and so on. Consumers tend to be quite loyal, and there seems to be a lot of priority over brand name, heritage, and reputation over technology. So there isn't much research in this area, and I'm really curious to see what's going on in terms of the UK versus US market to start with. So these are the research questions that I've been working on for the past year, I would say. So what is happening between entrants and new brands and incumbents in the fashion markets? And then what's going on between the US and Europe in terms of the capitals of fashion? So London, Milan, is LA taking over? What's going on in that direction? And what is the role of technological innovation, societal value shift, and also the culture, the management of the single organization? What have these factors got to do with the level of technological innovation of companies? So there aren't many studies in this area in fashion. So I hope it makes sense, but feel free to raise your hand and ask more questions. So this is just a brief overview because I want to ask you some questions and have a bit of a discussion before I share more findings with you. So some questions for you, and I know there's a very long list, but as I was mentioning, this project is a big one. So questions for you as the LA fashion experts. What is the hub of LA fashion here in LA, and what do you think are brands to watch out for in terms of technology innovation? When I say technology innovation, it's both the product innovation, but also supply chain or distribution or new ways of communicating, like it could be even avatars or metaverse, NFTs, and so on. And then what's your view on brands that are falling versus brands that are rising? So an example that I always bring in is Victoria's Secret versus Aerie, or it could be like Benetton in Europe, brands that are more, let's say, innovative in terms of bringing in cultural trends, diversity and inclusivity, technological change, and so on. So it would be great to perhaps start with your view on these first few questions, like how do you see this happening in LA? Or do you see any differences between LA and Europe, the UK? You can unmute yourself and just jump on the
conversation. I have a question. This is Hannah. When you say LA, what do you mean? Because it's a very wide question. LA is huge in terms of what kind of fashion. Are we looking at diversity? Are we looking at what kind of, like, you're looking at a change that we see in LA? Because that's kind of like what market, the market here is so big. And I don't know. I mean, I kind of want to understand a little bit the question a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. I guess I'm not an expert of the LA fashion market. So I'm more looking at it from how the West Coast of the US brings in technological innovation in fashion. So the Allbirds, the Stitch Fix, everything which is California based on new business models. So anything that you can share, like what you think in terms of the LA fashion scene. So what's the hub of the LA fashion scene? What are the key trends or any brands that I should look out for?
Nice. Ciao, Francesca. Nice to hear your English accent breaking through. And shalom, Shannon. Hannah.
It's Hannah, yeah.
Hannah. Shabbat shalom. Listen, I think you're asking the right question, Francesca, because this should be the innovation center, the hub. We've got Silicon Valley. I'm up in Oakland. Silicon Valley up here. It's an exceptional opportunity to add the technology into our fashion, and it's not happening. It just doesn't seem to be happening in LA. And I'm curious what brings you from a center like London to LA rather than to New York. I would expect to see good innovation coming through here. And some of the small companies are doing that online. So I can try on with a virtual mirror your garment that you've just designed. That's coming through in a small scale, but I don't see the large competition that you're asking for. I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this very bold answer. I appreciate it. Anyone else on those points following up on that or showing other views?
So I want to mention something that is in the chat, and this is a comment that Gwen make about diversity and equality and inclusivity. And I kind of second her thoughts. And it happens with students. Like most of the times, students are suspicious of whether companies actually value, diversity and equality, or if there is anything that is more connected to opportunity and publicity. That's like the trendy. It's so trendy, and it's kind of like a must. Like you have nowadays to have it into your advertising, and if you're doing anything on social media, consider who is going to be portrayed, what is the image, because that's what is expected, but not mostly because they believe on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this maybe goes back to my second question in terms of the Victoria's Secret versus Aerie brands. So brands that were born on the diversity and inclusivity versus brands that are trying now to, like Victoria's Secret, have Down syndrome models or trying to tick those boxes. Okay.
Correct. So it's kind of like more that feel. And then also John is bringing another element that is really key. And it's also, we're thinking about what our students as consumers and designers, they have like both sides of the coin. They are designing right now, but they're also part of the consumption. And what are they following and what they're buying and what they're investing is also about sustainability. And this is a comment that Johnny made. She says, my students seem to care a lot about sustainability. And Louis is mentioning the innovators' trends tend to be focused on sustainability. The premium denim market was born here. The surf and the skate industry. This was kind of like the hub for that type of sports / hobbies,
Okay, that is interesting. Thank you. And going back to what you were making earlier, Larry, I think as a comment in terms of not seeing much innovation in here. I chose LA, well, definitely because it's one of the key capitals for fashion. It has you are the experts of LA, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess compared to New York, there's also here quite a few emerging designers. The style is very different from New York. It's closer to Silicon Valley, so the influence should ideally bring more innovation, attract more talent. I mean, should be the hub for the creative industries, including fashion, right? So I decided to be in LA due to the proximity to Silicon Valley, to compare and contrast it with London. Because of course, USC as a center for global innovation is in here. So there were quite a few tick the boxes that maybe made me choose LA. But it would be interesting to see if anyone else shares this view that LA is not as tech forward in terms of fashion as it could be. Because that's something I haven't really experienced so far. So this is a new and interesting view for me.
So I see a really interesting comments on our chat. So I don't know if Kara wants to talk a little bit about her points about the entertaining industry.
Sure, I can. I just didn't want to, I didn't want to butt in because it's a little bit of a tangent. But Larry's talking about how we're not a fashion center, and in some ways, LA is sort of, we're second city to New York, and New York is fashion, fashion, fashion. But we really are a big fashion mover, but we do it through the medium of film and television, because we are the film television center, and film television moves so much of what is desirable in fashion. And, if you look at the interaction of fashion and technology, I'd like to mention Star Trek. That phone that you have in your hand is because geeks watched Star Trek and they wanted that tablet. You know, so entertainment is a much bigger driver than people give it credit for. And what's happening in the entertainment industry, costume wise, is there's definitely a push towards, because God, film is so destructive. We just take stuff and like ruin it and throw it away. But there is more of a movement in the industry to become more sustainable. That is a big discussion about how different departments, particularly costume, can be more environmentally friendly, more environmentally aware. I think COVID had a big impact on that. And part of that is when you look at big budget sci-fi now, a lot of the costumes, and sort of the leader on that was the whole Hunger Games series. What you saw on bodies on screen, a lot of it didn't exist in reality. It was computer generated imagery layered over the costumes. And, you know, here's my question, and I've thought about this a lot, is we're all living in a virtual world now in many ways, and COVID changed a lot of that, but we already were sort of trending towards, with the rise of social media, creating these curated personalities for ourselves. When is that CGI enhancement going to drip down to ordinary people? And how are we going to use that? And what about the stuff that's happening in raves and club wear, the lighted garments? You know, I want to see when that's going to percolate into bigger fashion. See, that was a lot. That's why I wrote in the chat, because like you, I am Italian and I could talk all day.
Absolutely. Thank you. Very good, interesting points that you made, Cara. And I would like to follow up on that, maybe on another conversation. But absolutely. So I think you raised a good point in terms of centers for fashion and how all this entertainment is driving the industry. I still think that like LA has a huge impact in terms of fashion, and I do see and I've been speaking with designers and brands and tech providers, so I have multiple angles to see how this technology innovation is coming through in LA versus Europe. So my other questions for you would be like, what's the role of China in terms of manufacturing and also key capital for fashion like Shanghai? Is it disrupting the fashion industry as a market? What do you think is happening in terms of technology with manufacturing, supply chain, and so on within the Chinese market? And related to that, like, what are the new technology in clothing manufacture that you see? I'm comparing all these different capitals of fashion. So the more traditional Paris, Milan, London versus New York, LA, Shanghai. So what do you think are the centers for fashion in the world and the related technologies?
So if I mention something about that connection with China and the supply chain, I know Mona and also Luis make some comments in the chat. So I don't know if they want to talk a little bit about that portion. Luis, Mona, do you guys want to open your mic and maybe elaborate more?
I'll speak up. You know, China still, even though we have a trade war with China, it's still the #1 provider of apparel globally and to the United States, way far above any other country. Vietnam came on very strong. They have tremendous technology they're using in Vietnam to create speed to market because it's a new industry for them. So everything's been built from scratch. I mean, you know, we didn't start doing business with them until the early 2000s because of our own issues, you know, politically. But, you know, it's a supply chain for us more than it is an influence on fashion in terms of what it looks like, because we're giving them all the ideas and they are creating them and shipping them back to us. So they are using a lot of technology. The speed to market that's been created with the technology we use to create product is amazing. Between 3D pattern making and PLM and ERP and all these different technologies we use in the industry, we're very hands-on with that. And the Chinese apparel industry in particular has really adapted that very quickly. And, it's been tougher for some of the other countries to be that responsive as China has. But we're paying a lot more money for our products from China than we used to. It doesn't seem to have affected people slowing down. There's, they may have pulled back a little bit, gone to some other countries, but it's a supply chain influence more than anything else. It's not a fashion per se influence.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Yeah. It's quite interesting because we say, at least at the London College of Fashion, that almost half, if not more, of our students in either fashion, like making, so Central St. Martin, or on the business side where I work, more than half of our students are Chinese. And we're always saying it will take nothing to have those people to actually come up with creative ideas and design the new designers of tomorrow. So not just the supply chain, but also something more design driven. So we're really watching out for that. And then just, that's a comment on the side. My last question for you before I start sharing more of my findings is, what are your views in terms of this metaverse, avatar space? How are organizations like fashion brands, companies using the metaverse? How is this impacting like on specific use cases or customers' experience? And how do you see fashion and this type of technology working together? Do you think fashion brands are adopting the metaverse? And if not, why not? Very current topic, I know.
We will talk a little bit more. Francesca will touch base on that.
Okay, great.
Later. Yes.
Yes.
I can speak a little bit briefly to that, because my MBA students are doing in their projects on innovative technology, exactly those kind of studies that you're asking about, and they're excited to see it. What we're reluctant is we just don't see it emerging from the fashion houses. The demands there from the customer, consumer, and entrepreneur point of view. So I would guess 2 or 3 years time we'll have this conversation. It'll be a choice of different technologies that are now available, but we're just at that cusp, I think, Francesca.
Yeah, I think brands are really afraid at this moment. They're not venturing into that territory because they don't know what to do or where it's going to go. So I honestly don't see a lot of movement from brands on that.
And when you say brands, is there any specific type of brands, or maybe the more established ones?
Oh, I'm talking about like more established fashion brands. They are. I mean, you see some kinds of innovation with smaller companies that are trying to, but it's you look at, I mean, even youth-oriented brands, they're doing fast fashion, like fashion like Forever 21. You would think this would be a no-brainer for them. But for some reason, they seem really reluctant to kind of step into that space, and they're just working where they feel comfortable, which is bad news because fast fashion is going to be over soon. But
Absolutely. Okay.
And I can add one thing to it. I know too, for the one company that set something up is Dick's Sporting Goods. They've got a metaverse app already going because they have all these new concepts of stores that they're testing, and so not everybody can get to them. So they've created a metaverse community where I can go to that store that's somewhere in New York, and I live in LA. So we're starting to see some of that. I think it's easier for retailers to kind of jump on this. And the other thing I just put in the chat, Rodeo Drive is trying to sell real estate in their metaverse of Rodeo Drive to those who are rent tenants on the street. So that's more what we're seeing rather than a brand per se. The retailers, I think, have an easier time of trying to create this because they're trying to create a shopping experience for the consumer rather than trying to show their a brand trying to show their product doing a virtual runway. Maybe there are some virtual runways. I haven't seen it yet. And I think somebody else.
I know Converse has a project with gaming right now, don't they?
Probably.
I think so. And Converse really stepped into the personalization space early on. You could go onto their website and choose your design, but Converse is really the only company that I know of that was kind of doing that sort of thing. And now they've got some crossover with the gaming industry. I heard about it. I'm not super familiar with it. I'm hoping somebody else knows better than I do.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing all these insights. And I really like the comment on how retailing is giving a, let's say, a broader experience. I think that's what's going to happen in the metaverse space. Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. I think we're halfway through our time, so I'll move on to my findings. So just to give you some more context, we're comparing Los Angeles versus London and pre-COVID versus post-COVID. I'm also doing this research comparing and contrasting different categories of brands, so from luxury to sportswear to more mass market brands, and seeing how this innovation is being conducted across different types or categories of brands. Here's all the theory that we have been including. So there's a lot from in terms of the size and bureaucracy of brands, so trying to see how incumbent brands struggle or are able to cannibalize their current offering to try and innovate in terms of products, service provision, business models, and so on. So we look at what type of brands we are talking about. So are these established like big brands? How much do they focus on the current existing customers, and how much are they willing to tap into a new audience? We also look at theories related to internal culture of the firm. So who is the top management? How likely are employees to innovate their existing practices with technological innovation? So we try to test all these different theories and try to see how brands react across the US and Europe. And by the way, just to fit something in, since I know you want to be able to use this material also for your classes, I think, I don't know usually how much theory you include, but these are theories that I try to teach to really, or include in my teaching as much as possible to underpin how then students can pick up and search for data, analyze, present any data analysis, especially within either supply chain or business related courses. So I don't know if it's relevant for you, but feel free to borrow this. I teach on business innovation and technology insights, and this is like my bread and butter of what I use almost every time. Okay, so in terms of like the context and what's going on in the fashion system, we've been looking again at all the different technological changes, so societal change and tech, also new trends, including new business models, of course, the rise of technology, diversity and inclusivity, all the embracement of AI technologies, and creating more sustainable like materials, as well as more sustainable consumption. So new business models emerging out of this. So in this study, what we're doing is looking at these macro trends and how the macro trends have been shaping the degree of technological innovation of fashion businesses, and how this varies across the US and the UK pre and post-COVID. So I'm jumping straight into our findings because I think this is the juicy, most interesting part. So I didn't want to include too much on methodology after discussing with Isabel, but to give you a brief snapshot of how I got to these graphs, we are doing a lot of market share data scrambles. So in terms of getting data from all the big Passport, Euromonitor data sets, companies' internal data, to try and see how the market share has been changing depending on the different levels of technological innovation of companies. So we've picked, as I was mentioning, different categories of brands. So from mass market apparel, which is what you see on the screen here, to luxury and sportswear, to see what is going on across market. So in here, we have included on the left graph brands such as Victoria's Secret, which is the blue line, and you can see how it's been decreasing in terms of their market share from 2012 until 2021. And the red line is the pandemic start. So how have they been coping with trends, macro trends, societal changes, and how that impacted on their market share. Of course, also including new entrants, like or new brands coming into a market. So Victoria's Secret has been really like decreasing their market share. We have other brands such as American Eagle Outfitters, so with Aerie, that I was trying to compare earlier, and that's the dark red line, and you see how they've been ramping up. And then I was trying to understand why. So what are the factors for these different types of performance? Or on the same graph, we see that a brand like Under Armour, so in green, has been going through some ups and downs, but then since the pandemic, they've been rising their market share again. And then Lululemon has also been performing quite well, whereas Forever 21 has been decreasing. Okay, so that's in the US market. In the UK market, what we see is that we have brands such as New Look, so a British fast fashion brand, really like the light blue line being decreasing quite significantly. But then we have brands such as Boohoo.com that we also have in the US, really like enhancing, moving up their market share. So I've tried to understand what are the reasons for this and how are those trends and brands' reactions to trends impacting on this market share across the two UK-US markets. So some of the key takeaways, and then I'll go more into detail and see if you have any questions or thoughts, but some of the key takeaways are that new brands, so like the Boohoo or the ASOS, the Aerie, are really gaining on incumbents across the two markets. And we are asking ourselves why, and then I will share some more insights on this. We see that this gain from the graphs, so from the market data, the gain is sharper in LA than it is in London. So market conditions are telling us that the LA market is more open to innovation compared to a market like London. So again, we want to understand the reasons why. This gain has been intensified by the pandemic. So the pandemic really has accelerated this sharper gain or rising of entrants, especially in the LA market. And we have to wait a few years to actually see the recovery of brands because, of course, the pandemic is still kind of ongoing or ending off, but we're not fully over it yet in terms of market share and company performance. So unless anyone has any questions, I'll try to share some more results. I'm not aware of the chat, but if you want to raise your hand or just jump on the microphone, otherwise I will carry on.
US and London, the UK had full lockdown on retail. We didn't have that here.
Yes.
We depending on where you lived, but the UK had a full lockdown. So how much business really did shift, or how much was just lost business, sales not made? Because in the US, we opened, we closed, we opened, we closed, depending on where you lived. So retailers had less business, but we didn't do full closures for extended period of times like the UK. So I wonder how that has to be some element of that has to have an impact.
Brexit's also been a massive impact, Francesca.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess, Larry, are you Scottish from the accent?
Yeah, well done. It's from Glasgow, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I did all my studies in St Andrews and Durham, so I know the accent.
St Andrews is gorgeous, yeah.
I know it's got very rainy compared to here. But yeah, can you share some more on these Brexit points? I think I'm
curious what you see in London. Is London going to lose its grip because Europe is no longer trading with Britain the way it used to? I'm hearing from my friends who are my age retiring to Spain and finding a lot easier in Spain to deal with European brands than they can ever do with British brands they'd like to. And that's a problem now. I think exporters from Britain are going to have a problem. And I wonder if it's going to marginalize, or is London just going to have that glamour?
Absolutely. So these are absolutely good points. So in this interpretation of why this market share changes across the two, both what you've said in terms of government regulations for different types of lockdowns and how the two markets dealt with it had a massive impact. So that's in the findings I'm going to share in a minute. And Brexit as well, of course, especially in terms of how many tourists could come to the UK before and take advantage of all these free, tax-free rebounds and so on. But now, of course, they cannot do anymore. But the situation in the UK has changed considerably since Brexit, which is also a reason why I think a lot of talent will not go to London as much anymore. So let's get into those findings, and thanks for sharing those points, very helpful. So getting more into these findings, and again, this study is still ongoing. I've conducted, I think, more than, because this is an ongoing project from my PhD, but I've conducted over 90 interviews with top managers across companies, so from luxury, affordable, fast fashion, sportswear, athleisure, and then technology providers and consultants across Europe and the US and China. And then we've done a lot of data scrabbling, again, from Passport, Euromonitor, Yahoo Finance, and so on. So some of these preliminary results are that technological innovations and the pandemic crisis are leading to cultural changes in society, of course, and this creates disruption within the fashion industry. So we see these different manifestations of disruption, but I tried to group around these findings here in key themes or areas. So we see some big changes in market share between the US and the UK, as I started to mention. So what I see from the data is that the US, in particular, this West Coast based organizations adopt technological innovation much faster compared to their UK organizational counterparts. So a lot of data is showing me how Nike, for instance, had a much higher increase in terms of market share in the US than the UK. So even the same brands have different market share across the two markets. Or Gap has shown a very steep increase in terms of their market share in the US, but they actually decreased market share in the UK. So different types of performances. And also we see that within the UK, a lot of brands, like traditional brands like Marks and Spencer, with limited digitalization and also declining kind of fashion diversity in their style, have experienced a very steep decrease in terms of market share. So by talking to the industry experts and trying to understand what's going on, I saw that a lot of this is due to different ways in which the brands engage with the digital elements. So either they try or don't try to share customer experience, whether they try to innovate their products, so really stepping outside or even getting into a new product category, which is something brands, especially established brands, are really reluctant to do. US brands seem to be stronger in innovation, as one of my participants did say to me, due to government investment and market openness to innovation. So this is in line with what you were saying in terms of government investment, so being open pre-post pandemic. Also in the US, I think innovation is seen as part of the process, like failure is not as bad as we do see it in Europe. If you get investors and you fail in your activities, it's much worse. Like it's considered worse in Europe compared to the US. And also like attracting and retaining talent. So where Brexit is a huge factor, where a lot of talent is now not coming to the UK anymore. So I'm doing another project on the side with the British Fashion Council, and we're looking at how SMEs, so small, medium companies, fashion companies in the UK have been reacting to Brexit and to COVID. And a lot of brands or head of those companies are saying to me that they cannot really bring talent in because it's harder to hire them. And because people are not attracted by the UK anymore, since the market is closing up. So they prefer going to either the US because the visa issues are as complex as they now are in the UK, and also because the market is much more open to, here in the US, to international talent. So some changes to consider there. I'm trying to see through my notes, but I think this is mainly it for these changes, US, UK. Then another key point is in terms of the Asian markets that seem to be much more ready for radical tech innovation. So a lot of my participants and examples of brands that I could see are really showing that Asian brands, so fashion or tech fashion brands, seem to be much more ready to jump to the next stage because they almost skipped a stage in between. So, for instance, if we consider payment options, they never really had all the car payment systems. Everything has been going from nothing to WeChat, Taobao, so happening online only, contactless via apps. So they definitely don't have this layer of legacies that a lot of other countries do. So they are like leapfroggers and just jumping into the next stage of technological innovations. Again, feel free to jump in and add or comment or criticize what I'm saying at any point. Another key aspect that we find is that there are different changes or manifestation of technological change between entrants and incumbents. So the increase in market share is often stronger for entrants than incumbents. So classic example, again, would be Aerie versus Victoria's Secret. So we see these two brands where really Aerie has been or was born on innovation in terms of products and shape and diversity and inclusivity. They've been focusing on technological innovation as part of their core DNA. So their market share has been increasing, and then the campaign, the marketing campaign, is a result of this brand positioning and brand image. Versus on the other side, the US lingerie brand Victoria's Secret, they have been trying to reposition themselves in terms of marketing and product to become more inclusive. And also they used to have very poor product try-on fitting online. So they're really trying to move in that direction. However, what experts and articles and market share data is showing is that the customer is not really believing these operations yet. So they perceive it more as a marketing activity or something that is going on, but they haven't really understood how Victoria's Secret has been changing through the years. So this is to say that for an established brand with an established heritage and market share, it's much harder to reposition themselves and get that credibility from their customers. So of course, this manifests in terms of how brands can successfully react to those different market trends. So the majority of the interviewees pointed out that a lot of entrants were actually born digital compared to established brands that were born physical, and then they had to shift to the digital sphere. So I was talking a lot with one of the, I can't mention the names for NDAs, but one of the emerging innovative brands, LA based, and they were saying to me that newer brands have better customer base and customer data. So they can compete with tech companies like the eBay, the Amazon of the world. So they can really get a proper understanding and sense of their customer compared to the big established brands that have either less data or they don't know how to use that data. So new roles like the Chief Data Officer, Chief Innovation Officer are still like being inserted into those organizations. I'm going to stop here and see if there's any questions because I see the chat is just bumping up. So I wonder if there's any.
Francesca?
Yeah, we're chatting a lot, so hopefully you'll be able to get the chat and get some ideas, because people are talking to each other and get great ideas there.
Okay,
So,
great. I will
But
do.
And-
Francesca, I mean, some of these things, these brands, if you look at 10 years before, were on the decline. Their brand was on the decline, their product quality, maybe they were not investing over the prior 10-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And so the pandemic kind of just closed the door, but it didn't. But for 10 years, you'd had digital brands going up against. You had more inclusive brands. You had ones with just fresher, younger images, with just more real. And so I think this has been happening for 10 years prior to. Because these brands, if you really look, J. Crew's been on the decline for a long time. Gap has not found its way for a long time.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say, and I fully agree, what would you say are the reasons for this?
Not staying relevant with the customer, product, some of it was product assortment, quality, inclusion, and then not staying current with how and where you shop and communicate. So 3 pieces. So
It's also an organizational problem that Gap.
Oh,
It takes them
right.
18 months to
Yeah.
get a new product out on the shelf. So at that time, people forgotten what it was, why they wanted it.
But
Mhm.
right, but if you look at the 3 pieces, everything they did became less relevant, they didn't understand the new customer, the product, whether it was the quality, whether it was inclusion, whether it was just what they were showing and selling, the same of the same. And then lastly, how you do it, how you talk to someone,
Yeah.
where you sell to them, how you ship to them, how all of that. You look at the winners and they were already building all those building blocks prior to
To Mona's point, I just want to bring up, BS made a huge mistake when they dropped swim. They lost a huge chunk of business, and that happened before COVID. And now they brought it back because they knew they had a strong swim business. They also went through all kinds of financial difficulties that also put them into a tailspin. It delayed things. You know, there's a whole combination of things. It's not just one issue that causes somebody to fall.
Yeah, I think COVID was just an amplifier for the issues that companies already had.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And Aerie, I pointed out, Aerie has a lot of new concepts that they're testing right now. BS can't do it that easily because they got to worry about their core business, whereas Aerie is smaller. They also are working off of their younger customer who's been shopping at American Eagle for years and know the brand so they've been following them since they were 11 years old, and they, now they're old enough to, buy the products that are sold in Aerie. So it's a completely different mindset too of customer and
company. But Louise, why didn't Pink stay younger? They could have. They had Pink in Victoria's Secret.
Because all those models got older that were representing them originally.
But I mean, and one of the things that I think, Gen Z is so much more socially conscious. And I think that Gen Z and the younger millennials really rejected VS's brand proposal, which was, very, very sexualized. And I think a lot of young women just were gravitating away from that, and the company didn't recognize it.
I agree totally. If you look at the product in Aerie compared to Pink, it's very different. And then of course you have Rihanna's product line, which is on the other end. So you got the 2 extremes. There is the extreme of wanting very sexy, look at Lizzo kind of, a lot of body showing. And then you also have the more conscious younger girl who likes the Aerie product.
Yeah, so Lizzo and Yitty is like a very different kind of sexuality. It's a very self-possessed, body positive, and Victoria's Secret was that really traditional male gaze centered thing. I think one of the reasons Yitty's become so popular is because in none of the advertising, none of the discussion is about how you're going to look to men. It's all about how you're going to feel in your body.
I totally agree.
So with this in mind, with all these changes, that we kind of mentioned that it's not just one specific factor, but it's a combination. And it's kind of understanding how the pandemic was an accelerator. So now the question here, Dr. Francesca, will be how we can actually incorporate these changes and think about how we can bring the disruptive technologies and what is happening, not just in Gen Zs, but also the alpha, that is the next generation that is coming out there, and how we can actually prepare our students to be relevant and avoid declining in our brands, because they're going to be the current and future, designers. So what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, that's a great question. Thank you. And I think it's, in a way, we have the answer in what many of the great participants here have been saying already. So you mentioned how to stay relevant under different aspects. And you also mentioned that the brands that have been and that are the winners are those that are already looking ahead. So I guess for the designers of tomorrow, and that's actually my upcoming findings in the next slide, is like this timing for innovation. So it's actually the next point, timing for innovating. So what I think is much more successful in the US compared to Europe and the UK that I've been looking at is that here in this part of the world, it's part of the culture, it's part of the mentality of many organizations, or I would say more organizations than we see in Europe. But those organizations have less heritage, have less legacies. So a lot of brands take risks faster, or they're born on innovation. Or they transformed their brand DNA. So it's the key aspect is not just innovating. And some of you were mentioning this, but it's actually like when to innovate. So anticipating trends, like Nike does all the time, or Lululemon at the time coming up with this new product, innovation, stretches, and specific fabrics and patents for creating like a new body shape, or conferring new styles which are athleisure and new comfortable styles. So I think timing for innovation is key, and I think that would be the answer to your question. So working ahead, what could be the future trends rather than taking forever to advance. So definitely timing is one, but within timing, I mean, there is a massive, I would say, how would you say, response to that, or factor for that, which is what I think Larry was mentioning earlier. So this kind of culture of the organization. So whether the organization has this either top management that is future thinking or open to new ideas, because so often, especially when I speak with the European based luxury brands, and I'm saying in specific luxury, they have so much heritage and history that they need to defend. And on one side, that's a great aspect. On the other side, that's a torture because they cannot move faster enough. So I think culture of organizations is key for this timely change to happen. And a lot of the participants were saying to me that what is different in the US versus Europe is this mentality of having less legacies and boundaries. So companies can really like think outside of the box less and be competing with the Amazon or the eBay versus competing with more traditional brands. So I would say that's one of the answers to that. And then I would like to go back to what I can't remember. I'm really terrible with names, and this system of not showing everyone's faces is not helping. But someone was mentioning these different factors of product innovation and communication innovation and distribution innovation. So these different factors, right? I wonder what everyone thinks about whether there is one of these aspects that is more important than the other. So for being relevant, staying relevant, or becoming relevant for this Gap, WEF Corporation, Victoria's Secret, what is the key factor? So should they be innovating in products, in communication, in distribution, in everything? What's the core aspect? Because of course they cannot be doing everything at the same time, especially very big companies. So I wonder, where should the R&D be invested into? Does it make sense?
The culture, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
I think it's the culture you mentioned. It's got to value risk-taking. As a corporate, as a company culture, risk-taking has to happen all the time, whether it's innovation in the way we identify the supply chain. We can actually have Internet of Things identify the sustainability of a product, all from the farmer right through to whoever wears it, but we don't bother because it's not perceived as a value and the customer wants it. So the companies that are innovating in that direction, and Mona's pointed out, they've been doing it for quite a few years. They're the ones that are going to be spurting ahead of us, I think. That's my feeling.
Absolutely, thank you. Oh yeah, Mona, I think you were the one mentioning these three aspects. So back to you.
Right. I think that you have to make a quality product and there has to be someone they want to buy, but what we're wearing is not what's being entirely reinvented, but where and how we buy it and how we hear about it. So I'm not sure which of those I'd order 1 and 2, but there's a lot of stuff being sold that, after going through my closets, that I've seen before. Let's just say that, okay? But how it's sold and how it's communicated and styled has absolutely changed.
So as part of this study that I'm conducting, I'm really trying to understand whether this market share is impacted more by product innovation versus companies that are expanding and innovating in their marketing, in their communication campaign, in their distribution. So all the tryout with avatars, metaverse, all these new technologies. And I'm really trying to see, I'm still collecting the data, so I don't have any findings yet, but kind of, I have a feeling. So it would be great to know your feelings as well.
So I think one of the key components is that if you have a great product or a great development and you're not able to communicate it properly to your users, then it's like not having it. So, and that happens to a lot of companies, you know, that they have this development, they have this product, and that's what is right now, even social media is gaining so much popularity and influencers. It's kind of being able to spread what are you doing and find out and communicating your purpose, your development, your core values, why they should be loyal to you. And I have noticed this as a product in design engineer is that sometimes that's the main component, not just what you have. You can have a good product, but if you're not able to sell it and communicate it, you have nothing. On the other hand, I have seen other companies that they actually create all this great message full of storytelling, and the product is not even amazing, but yet still they are able to stay and maintain. They are not amazing, but they're still keep up and they're staying there. So of course, is having a great product, that's the ideal, but then the way that you are communicating it and putting it out there into the market. So you really portray what is the real message and the purpose. And with this, I kind of we can actually start wrapping up our conversation today. I want to be really cognizant of everyone's time. So if we want to have like one last comment, Francesca, some final insights about, you know, the disruption, you know, right now that we are experiencing in innovation. As we know, it's not just one element, but it's multiple elements that they are bringing together, and how we can actually even move forward with this. So then, as I mentioned, if you want to leave us like with one comment, of course, I will be sharing your email information, and the presentation and the recording will be in Canvas, so everyone can access this online.
Absolutely. So I would like to just finish off with this big table, which is the output of classifications of innovations that across industries, so not just within fashion. And it's something I really published with my colleague, Becky. So I think, first of all, innovation is not coming just from fashion. Most of the disruptive innovations come across industries. So here we classified companies against different types of temporary or long-term or COVID only or post-COVID related innovations. And I think really the disruptive innovations are coming from those companies that, again, are thinking post-COVID. So being able to couple up with other organizations and to use internal and external capabilities. So I think this goes back to what you were asking earlier, like what to do to be successful and how could your students incorporate these insights and be the future leaders of tomorrow. And I think here we have quite a few examples where really what's emerging is that drivers for innovations are resilience. So going through all these timings, future thinking, and really having a purpose for the brand. So why should a customer become loyal to your brand rather than another brand? And I think being purposeful is especially what will make the difference for apparel, fashion brands in the future, now that everything is going through sustainability, diversity, and inclusivity. So what's the purpose? Like giving a reason for the customer to shop at your brand. Those are my concluding thoughts.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we really appreciate this. Was a great moment to hear some of your current findings, but also, understand our current experience and then try to have some ideas. As you mentioned, innovation, I think is a must. But sometimes I compare it with love. And it's because it's so hard sometimes to find. It's so like everyone want it, everyone talk about it, but it's like so ambiguous, but yet you have to, and one of the elements is not just one specifically. For me, it's like a balance of multiple variables that they are combined. It's like love, like the right person at the right moment, at the right space, with the right conditions, with the right. So it's like some multiple of variables that are coming across just to create the balance. And yet we know we need to have it. We have it, but yet it's so different. And as you mentioned, it's not just design, it's not just fashion. Innovation we can encounter in different areas, different fields. And I think the key component is to understand that there is a cross section, that you can actually bring knowledge from one field to another one. And innovation is about connecting the dots. That's how I see innovation. It's like when you connect the dots and you find that balance. So that will be my final thought. And I want to thank everyone for being part of this professional development today. As I said, we're going to be sharing the recording. And then, of course, I will be sharing Francesca information. So if any one of you has more questions, you can actually get in touch with her, learn more about her findings, about her research, and read her current papers. I really appreciate your time, and then have a great weekend and stay cool.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Take care.
Pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Have you met with our MBA people, Francesca?
I did 3 years ago, so it would be great to be involved again. The only thing is I'm heading back to London in exactly 1 week.
Oh, good for you.
Well, I'm not too sure, but I'll be back out here again in February. So there will be more chances. February 2023.
Well, I teach the innovative technology program in the winter in February. So I'd really be delighted to have you come as a guest speaker.
Nice.
That would be a pleasure.
I'll email you and let you know what we do.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was excellent. Thanks, Isabel.
Yes, absolutely, Larry. I will share her email so you can get in contact with Francesca.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, Isabella. Bye-bye.
Bye, Francesca. Thank you. Interesting.